king of Pokhara was a very acquisitive monarch, and in the act of acquiring came the act of conquering. He loved to acquire because it gave him the opportunity to conquer. So the king of Pokhara was always at war. But one day, after a particularly fierce battle, a great storm came up as they were returning to his castle, and they had to take comfort and hospitality in a small village. Well, the king was billeted to a very small hut of an old couple. But he was restless throughout the night. He tossed and turned sleeplessly. And it seemed that there were voices bouncing off the walls. Off one wall came a voice which said, "A child has been born, and it will not live long, it will die." And from another wall came a voice which said, "A child has been born, who will live but will die by the hand of its father." And then from another wall came a voice which said, "A child has been born, who will be the cause of the death of the king of Pokhara. He will marry his daughter and take over the kingdom." Now it seemed in the morning, when the king arose, that the first two voices had been subsumed by the third, and all he could think of was the child that had been born, who would be the cause of his death. So he took his soldiers, and they dispersed to visit every house in the village to see where a child had been born. Now this was a village of old people, so there was only one couple who had recently given birth to a son. So the king and his soldiers went to that house, and the king confronted the parents and said, "You will sell me this child for 1,000 silver pieces, but if you do not do so, I will have you all killed." Now, of course, the parents had no choice. They had to relinquish their child. The child was taken, and on the ride back to the king's palace, the king threw the child over a precipice and rode on. But as fate would have it, an old woman out gathering herbs heard the cries of the infant who had fallen into some shrubs. Now the old woman took the child back to her village, and because there was another woman who had recently given birth, it was agreed that she become a wet nurse to this child. The child was called Sokhao, and Sokhao means gift. And being nurtured, this child grew up to a handsome and refined young man. But Sakao was made an apprentice to a confectioner in the village, but he never ceased to have pleasure in telling the story of how he was found. And this soon came to the ears of the king of Pokhara, who immediately sent a messenger with a box of poisoned confections with the instructions that these confections be emulated, made exactly as those that were sent. Now, of course, as fate would have it, when the box arrived, and Sagao was about to partake of them, his employer, the owner of the confectionery shop, said, "I am the owner and the boss here, and it is my job to do as the king has said." But of course, immediately on ingesting the poisoned confections, he died. Now, of course, it came to the ears of the king of Pokhara that this young man, Sagao, was still alive. And so he plotted. He came to that village in disguise with his groom, who was a well-trained assassin. And he was given the instructions as they were staying in the local caravanserai, the local guest house, that anyone who came through the night was to be immediately killed with the assassin's knife. And then a message was sent to Sagao to come to the guest house in the middle of the night. Now, in the middle of the night, the king heard a kerfuffle going on, and so he immediately went out to that part of the guest house and met the assassin's knife. Now, the rest of the story we can perhaps already glean, and maybe you can complete the story in your own way. But a second story of a great samurai called Tadamasu. Now, Tadamasu was a very devoted, very dedicated, very loyal samurai sword master, loyal to the shogun of the day. But Tadamasu also studied the art of Zen under the Zen master Sasu. But the shogun also was an acquisitive monarch, and there was a battle. Tadamasu was called to the battlefield, where he fought valiantly. But Bloodied, on his way back from the battlefield, still wearing his armor, he went to the temple where his master Sasu was the abbot. He staggered in as Abbot Sasu was giving a tea ceremony, and the master handed him a cup of tea and said, "How does it go with you?" And Tadamasu dropped the cup and saucer and trampled on it, stating, "Heaven and earth are totally shattered." Master Abbot Sasu looked at him and said, "When heaven and earth are totally shattered, how does it go with you?" And Tadamasu crossed his arms across his chest, looked into the eyes of the master, and bowed his head. With that, Master Sasu slapped him roundly and hard, and Tadamasu recoiled in pain. Master Sasu said, "Heaven and earth are not yet shattered." Just then, in the distance, there was a sound of the trumpet calling all the samurais to the battlefield, and Tadamasu rushed off to join the battle once again. After the battle was over, now severely wounded, he came back to the temple and faced Master Abbot Sasu. Master Abbot Sasu said, "When heaven and earth are totally shattered, how goes it with you?" And with that, Tadamasu leaned on his sword, piercing his armor. He shouted, "Kai!" and he died. Tell me, where do these two stories meet? If we try to reconcile them with our mind, analyze them, there's no possibility for us to answer this question. We have to go to that place where all stories meet, and from where all stories emanate. What is the commonality between these two stories? How will you verbalize it? How will you express it? As we must. Where do these two stories meet? What is it that arises in you as an awareness? king of Pokhara, acquisitive, driven, caught between acquiring and conquering. And Tadamasu, the samurai, dedicated to the sword, but a Zen adherent. Where do they meet? In us. Both fell on their sword. So what is the common point of these stories?